morning, parents. Welcome to our latest Monday morning meditation. Our passage this morning is in 1 Kings chapter 3. We're starting verse 7, and I'm going to read there. It says, "And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father, although I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in, and your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people?" The context here is that David has died and Solomon has now become king, and he's just getting started. And so he's offering at the high place where they would make sacrifices. He's offering at the high place of Gibeon 1,000 sacrifices to God on an altar. And so he's giving in proportion to his wealth as a king. And God honors and confirms the sacrifice that Solomon has made. He's honored this sacrifice, and so he appears to him in a dream. He comes to him in a dream, and he says, ask of me whatever you want. And then what we've read in our passage is Solomon's response to this statement that God has made. Ask of me whatever you want, and I will do it for you. And so Solomon responds by talking about the faithfulness of God to David in verse 6. And then in our verses, verse 7, he says, "Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father." So one of the neat things to look at there first is that Solomon first recognizes himself in terms of his identity before his role. Now, he's been given this role as a king to, of course, lead God's people. But his identity is first and foremost a servant, right? And that's important. Like, he's a servant of God before he's a king. And how is he supposed to be a king over the people of Israel? He's supposed to be a king over the people of Israel as a servant of God. That's the only way he'll do it well. And then the same is true for us, right? We've been given this role. We weren't always parents, but we've been given this role as parents. But before we were parents, we were servants of God if we are in Christ, right? If we're Christians, we're servants of God first, and then we're given this role as parents. So how are we to parent our children? We're to parent our children as servants of God. And keeping this in mind, first and foremost, is very important. And then Solomon goes on to say, right, although, right, I'm a king, although I am but a little child. And why is he a little child? Well, he says, I do not know how to go out or come in. What he's saying is he doesn't know how to do the day-to-day kingly government responsibilities that he's supposed to do. Because up to this point, right, Solomon has never done them in an official way. And so he recognizes himself as, he's a grown man, but in terms of this task, in terms of this role, he's actually just a little child. And the truth is, that's how we all start off as parents, right? No matter how old we are, when we become parents, we're doing it for the very first time. And so in that respect, right, we're just little children when it comes to parenting responsibilities. And we're just little children who don't really know how to go out or come in. And so we need God's assistance then, of course, right? We need God's help. We need God's wisdom in order to do this. There's a lot of times, right, we might have, for marriage, we might have premarital counseling that is given. But before you go into that big responsibility of marriage, but we don't necessarily have pre-parenting classes, before we become parents. I think that also would be quite helpful. And so then it goes on to say, right, and your servant is in the midst of your people. Notice he doesn't say, and your king is in the midst of your people, right? He's talking to God. So, and your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. So we are servants, we are servants and parents in the midst of our children, in the midst of image bearers of a holy God. Just like Solomon in his role, in one sense, that we have a similar function. And so with all of this knowledge and with all this weight and responsibility, Solomon says, verse 9, "Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil." I think this is a fantastic prayer for parents, right? Give me an understanding mind to discern between good and evil, right? As a parent, this is what we need: an understanding mind, wisdom, an understanding heart to discern between good and evil in the lives of our children. because the truth of the matter is sometimes we can actually, evil can bypass us, right? We might not ever even see it in our families or notice it, right? We're not attuned to it. We don't have spiritual eyes and spiritual sight. This is what Solomon is praying for. And then even goodness, right? The things that we should be giving to our children, that might escape us as well. We're ignorant of those things. What ought I to give that's good to my children? And so those things can escape us as well. This is a fantastic prayer that Solomon says, right? And so I want to kind of just hit on that real quick, just a few things to say in terms of why we need wisdom. And the first is because God doesn't want us to be either too harsh nor too lenient with our children. So we're not to be too harsh and exasperate them towards wrath, demands that are too high for them. And neither are we to be too lenient with them, letting them get away with sin and evil when they ought not to. Also, right, we always come into situations, if we're honest, where we just don't know what to do. There are times in parenting for myself where I walk into a situation and quite honestly, I just don't know what to do. Both of the kids are arguing with one another. How do I discipline them? Who's wrong? Are they both wrong in this situation? How am I to respond in this situation to help them? A lot of times our first instinct can be when we find them misbehaving is to immediately punish. But our responsibility as parents is to discipline, right? So if you kind of go into a situation and you just immediately punish, go to your room, do this, do that, right? What can happen is that our children will just respond with anger. But our responsibility is we come into those situations to discipline, to help soften their heart, to help them acknowledge and confess their wrong, and to soften their heart that they might want to do the right thing. Right, so this is our responsibility when we come into those kinds of situations. And finally, right, we need wisdom because, well, we're to be representatives of God's parenting and God's discipline. What a weighty task, right? So God parents and disciplines his children, Christians, and we're to represent him in that within our parenting. And so when we think about that, we should immediately say, wow, I am pretty much woefully inadequate for that kind of task and that responsibility. But here's the good news, right? We have a faithful God who gives wisdom. And so we ask of him, Lord, will you give me wisdom? Will you give me an understanding mind, an understanding heart, that I might represent you well within my parenting. And so may this humble attitude, understanding our identity as servants, understanding our role as parents, may this lead us into asking God for wisdom, and by his grace, he will actually give it. Well, I hope this helps you, and I look forward to continuing to help you build faith in families. God bless.